if the United States will be hit again by another crisis, China will be the only country which will have the financial wherewithal and the capabilities and the manufacturing prowess to help saving the United States. That means from now till whenever that disaster happens, and I hope it will never happen, the US government and the decision makers in Washington, including members of the Congress, in the Senate, in the House of Representatives, should really care about incentivizing China to do the right thing if a major crisis hits the United States again, rather than, for example, alienating China, pushing China out of the window, writing off China, dismissing China, for example. Remember what happened between China and the United States in 2008 and how much China did to help save the United States.
Welcome back to Legitimate Targets, everybody. I hope you're all having a great day. I have got a very special guest joining us today. You've probably seen video clips or statements of his out on the ether flowing around because he tells it like it is. And people in Washington, D.C. maybe sometimes don't like that, but I love it. And the free people of the world definitely love it. So joining me is Professor Victor Gao. He is a Chinese lawyer, academic, and vice president of the Center for China and Globalization, known for his role as Deng Xiaoping's English interpreter in the 1980s and his expertise in international relations. Professor Gao, thank you so much for joining me here today. How are you doing?
Good evening. Thank you very much for having me. I'm fine.
It's a great honor. I want to start off by asking you about the 80th victory over Japanese aggression and fascism, which is going to be taking place in a few days. If you could, to people who may not be aware of the history, and as an American who went through the American education system, I can say a lot of us are not. What does this mean for China, and what does it mean for the world?
Yes, indeed. On September the 3rd, 2025, in a matter of weeks, China will celebrate the 80th year anniversary of what we call the Chinese People's War of Resistance against Japanese aggression, as well as the 80th anniversary of the world's people's victory against Japanese fascism. So this will be a big occasion for China. And I think the military parade, which will take place in the middle of Beijing, will probably be the largest scale and the most impressive military parade in human history. And China will put forward its best foot in terms of displaying the best military hardware, software, drones, robots you can imagine. And I think it is meant to impress the world by showing China's commitment to defending peace and promoting peace, not only for China itself, but throughout the world. And I think the fact that China and the United States were actually allies, we were comrades in arms, fighting shoulder to shoulder, which eventually led to the defeat of Japanese fascism in August 1948, meant a lot for China today and for the United States today. However, allow me to remind your distinguished audience that while the America's war against Japanese aggression, as well as against Nazi fascism, lasted ever since the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, a little bit short of 4 years in total, China's war of resistance against Japanese aggression lasted for a total of 14 years, since 1931. So I think China contributed much more and sacrificed much more. Altogether, more than 30 million people were lost in this war, mostly killed by the Japanese aggressors and otherwise being lost in the war. So I think China and the United States behaved and conducted themselves with dignity. We cooperated closely. And in China today, we still hear all these legends about the Flying Tigers headed by General Chennault and the Doolittle raiders who bombed Tokyo to the surprise of the Japanese. And then they were crash landing in China, sometimes in occupied territories in the Chinese coastline. And thousands of the Chinese civilians actually risked their own life to save the Doolittle raiders. And the legends were so touching. And I think these really formed the foundation of the friendship and cooperation and the mutual goodwill towards each other between the Chinese people and the American people. So I think September the 3rd should be a gathering of all the distinguished leaders in the world to celebrate the big occasions. And I think it is also a rare opportunity for China and the United States to demonstrate their very glorious history of fighting against the Japanese aggressors as allies, leading towards the winning of the Second World War and leading towards the founding of the international order that we are still living in, which was based and founded on the ashes of the Second World War in 1945.
Well, I greatly look forward to that historic day. And thank you for answering my question. I always find it interesting. China, thousands and thousands of years of history, and you remember, our Chinese politicians, thinkers remember everything, all the times that we were together, all the times that we helped each other out. But Americans with such a short history never seem to remember these things. It's very important. I want to ask you something that Professor Zhang Weiwei often says about the current world order, the multipolar world, regarding relations with the United States. He says, when you look at Russia and China, we have a unique relationship of reform and revolution. And he talks about Chinese economic resistance and sovereignty being the reform approach to resisting imperialism, and revolution in the case of the Russian SMO. Do you think that China does embody the revolution in its own unique way, or do you think it needs to potentially embody it more? I mean, we see this wolf-style diplomacy gaining a lot of popularity in China. Could this be a more standard future for Chinese thinking in relation to the United States moving forward?
Well, first of all, ever since 1840, when the British launched this Opium War against China, China started the steady decline towards the end of the 19th century. China was a very weakened and was kind of decimated in a sense. And then since 1900 till about 1911 and 1912, when the Manchu dynasty, the last dynasty in China, collapsed on its own weight, and the Republic of China was founded. And then, you also had chaos, warlord, civil war, revolution, one after another in China, until 1949, when the People's Republic of China was founded by Mao Zedong and the communists, and leading towards the fleeing from mainland China by the nationalist government headed by Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek to Taiwan. And I think this demonstrated, yes, indeed, in the period of about 100 years since 1840 to 1949, there were chaos in China, decline and implosion and civil war and unrest and foreign aggression, occupation of China in one part or another and taking away Chinese territory. Hong Kong was taken away by Britain, for example, and many similar things happened. From the Chinese perspective, we consider this as 100 years of national humiliation. And when Mao Zedong declared that the Chinese people now standing up on their feet on October the 1st, 1949, that declared the new beginning of China, which we call the new China. So we are still in this new era of new China founded in October 1949. Now, even after 1949, there have been lots of political struggles, campaigns, and between 1966 to 1976, there was what we call the Great Cultural Revolution, which in essence was a great upheaval, a great tragedy for the Chinese nation. However, I think on and on, through ups and downs, through turmoil, sometimes self-inflicted pains in China, since 1949, China managed to reorient eventually around 1978 when Deng Xiaoping became the paramount leader in China. I had the great honor and great privilege of working for Deng Xiaoping for more than 20 of his most important meetings with visiting foreign dignitaries, including many leaders from the United States. As a matter of fact, China embarked on reform and opening to the outside world. So I would say Mao Zedong changed China, and Deng Xiaoping changed China as well as the world. By today, China is fully integrated with the rest of the world, and China and the United States actually have become very much integrated with each other. When I hear people in Washington talking about decoupling China from the United States, I cannot help but chuckling. How could that be possible? You're talking about the equivalent of decoupling the Earth from the moon. Never want to think about it. You never want to try that. And even if you try that, you will never succeed. And even if you succeed, then you will be hit with greater calamities. So I think the fact that China and the United States now are the two most important and the largest economies in the world, each with huge amount of international global responsibilities resting on their shoulder, demonstrated that the policy of China, the United States getting along with each other, engaging with each other ever since 1971 when Dr. Henry Kissinger made that historic secret visit to China, and President Nixon made that important state visit to China in 1972, and President Carter really normalized, and Deng Xiaoping together normalized China-US relations, officiated on January the 1st, 1979. The two countries, which I both respect so much, had gone through ups and downs. We were estranged from each other. We didn't talk with each other. And then ever since when we re-engaged with each other, we actually created huge benefits for both China as well as for the United States. And together, we actually jointly worked together to end the Cold War. If Americans thought that the Cold War was ended by the United States single-handedly, I want to tell your audience, no, that's not the case. I think China-US collaboration and cooperation, much of that behind the scene, in great confidentiality, for example, eventually led to the ending of the Cold War. And I agree with what President Trump said recently. He said that if China and the United States can reach an agreement with each other, China and the United States can solve all the problems in the world together through our cooperation. That will be a better world, and that will be what I want to envision about China-US relations. We are different, of course, but we can respect each other, we can get along with each other, and we can really respect what I have been calling for, the inevitability of peace between China and the United States. In summary, yes, we went through lots of pains, ups and downs, revolution, chaos, civil war, warlords, for example. But today, China is the largest manufacturing country in the world. And the Chinese economy, depending on how you define it, has the largest consumer market in the world. And the size of the Chinese economy, if we use of purchasing power parity, is already 130% that of the United States. And China produces about 250% as much power as the United States. And the Chinese electricity for industrial use is more than 6 times as much as the US electricity for industrial use. And China is the biggest producer of automobiles of all kinds, including electric vehicles. And China's steel and iron production is more than the next 10 countries combined together. So I think China becomes much more impactful in the world of today. However, I don't think the Americans should really worry about this peaceful rise of China, because from the Chinese perspective, we want to respect all the countries, big or small, as equal, and we want to share with all of the countries in the world about our experience, how to pull ourselves from abject poverty, how to lift more than 800 million people out of poverty, and how to create the largest middle class in the world. by today, the middle class in China is already larger than the totality of the US population. That in itself is quite an achievement. And I hope between China and the United States, let's focus on facts and realities. Let's emphasize pragmatism and realism. And let's figure out a way to get along with each other rather than get into each other's jugular.
Everything you just said is incredible. And it's treated in the U.S. as though that is not the reality. It seems to me as though that is all the more reason why war is inevitable in the eyes of, those in D.C., those on Wall Street, the financial elite in America and around the world. Do you think that the United States is really an empire that will accept second or third place in terms of global power without putting up a fight?
First of all, as the late Dr. Henry Kissinger said, especially in the latter part of his life, especially in the last few years of his life, he said war is not and should not be an option between China and the United States. I cannot agree with his remark more. I really completely agree with what the late Dr. Henry Kissinger said. Let me tell you why. Because comparing China's conventional weapons with the US conventional weapons, I think China and the United States are completely on a par with each other. Neither has predominance or dominance over the other in terms of the conventional weapons. As a matter of fact, I truly believe, on the other hand, that China has some great advantages in conventional weapons. So if we are engaged in a conventional war, nobody can really defeat the other without suffering mortal damages to itself. Now, in terms of nuclear warheads, of course, the United States has more nuclear warheads than China. How many warheads China has, nobody knows, because China keeps a top secret about that. While the United States claims that it has the capability to destroy the world more than 1,000 times if it uses all its warheads, China will never make that kind of statement. China's message is more subtle. China's message is, if any country imposes nuclear war on China, China will have enough nuclear warheads to wipe out the attacking country. That means China is absolutely certain it has the ability to wipe out its enemy if it plays around with the nuclear war against China, with whatever that remains in its nuclear arsenal. That means the United States engaged in a conventional war against China will not win that war. The United States engaged in a nuclear war, God forbid, will not overwhelm China without being mutually destroyed by each other. That means a war between China and the United States will lead directly to Armageddon. In that sense, I completely disagree with that distinguished professor from Harvard who published a book called Destined for War, because he put forward this theory of the Thucydides trap and saying about rising power, challenging the dominant power, etc., eventually leading to war. Now, the professor, very renowned and highly respected by many quarters in the world, including in China, analyzed conventional wars and reached his conclusion. I think he did very solid scholarship work. However, he forgot to tell mankind and tell decision makers in Washington in particular that all the cases of war he analyzed were conventional wars. How can you use conclusions you derive by analyzing conventional war and try to apply your conclusion or the Thucydides trap theory to China and the United States, which are both very important nuclear powers? That leads me to reach my own conclusion about the inevitability of peace between China and the United States. Of course, China and the United States are different. We probably will remain different for eternity. China does not want to become another version of the United States, and the United States will never want to become another version of China. However, the difference between China and the United States should be our strength. It should be what will enrich us and mutually strengthen us, rather than what will pull us apart. So I hope the Americans, the Chinese, and people everywhere in the world will embrace my theory about the inevitability of peace. People in the United States always say there are two things inevitable. It is inevitable to die. Everyone will die, probably with Elon Musk as a potential exception. We don't know. And you need to pay tax. Otherwise, Uncle Sam will chase after you throughout the world to force you to pay tax. Victor Gao created the third inevitability. That is the inevitability of peace between China and the United States. I want to debate or argue with anyone in the world about war between China and the United States, which I completely disagree with. And I want to really convince them as much as I can about the inevitability of peace. The Chinese people, and I'm one of them, are not enemies of the United States or the American people. We have tremendous amount of goodwill towards the American people. And for me in particular, after spending 4 years in New Haven, Connecticut, and I was 1 year in the PhD program in the political science department in the graduate school of Yale University, and I spent 3 years at Yale Law School. Now, this was a highlight of my life for my personal self, for my family, and possibly for quite a few generations in my family to come. This is how I became very much indebted to the goodwill, to the friendliness of the American people, leading me to my firm conviction that the Chinese people and the American people are not enemies against each other. They are not out there to destroy each other. We can be friends. We can get along with each other. We can respect each other. We can deal with our differences in friendship, for example, through negotiations. And we do not want to be held hostage to the fantasy that war will break out. I'm always sickened by whoever in Washington talking about a war with China, because they don't know what they are talking about. They are talking about having the American people destroyed together with the Chinese people and the rest of mankind. Do you think that's responsibility by any general or admiral or government leaders or members of Congress in the United States for the American people, for the Chinese people, or for mankind at large? Let's talk about peace. Let's really become convicts of what I advocate. That is the inevitability of peace between China and the United States.
Well, I think that you're right, and I hope that you're right. When we had leaders like Kissinger, you were definitely right, because Kissinger was someone who made a great effort to understand not just China today, but Chinese civilization and the thousands of years that go along with that. China still does have great leaders who deeply understand America and its much younger civilization, whether it's who spent a good chunk of time in America, whether it's Wang Huning, America versus America. I think that book in it of itself is one of the greatest examples of a foreign leader having a great understanding of America and American culture. But in the United States today, you really don't have anyone that understands China, I don't think. And all they see is an adversary, a competitor, and one that needs to be taken out rather than competed with. When you look at the United States today, do you think that lack of education about China underscores their failed approach in this trade war that we've seen develop over the past several months?
Well, I think the United States, especially the United States under President Donald Trump, believes that it is the dominant power in the world and it is the unipole in the world. This is in contradiction to the international order established back in 1945, because if we look at the composition of the Security Council of the United Nations, with 5 permanent member states, each with a veto power, that means from the very beginning, the international order we are still living through is not meant to be unipolar. It was meant to be multipolar, involving 5 permanent member states, each with a veto power. Now, even though the Cold War ended around 1991, the United States, believing that it is the only surviving superpower in the world, being able to dominate above all the other countries, may be a distortion of the international order that was created in 1945. 1945. Now, China does not want to change the international order as it is. China wants to modify and improve the international order we are living through. And I don't think the world today will ever go back to a unipolarity. The multipolarity is a fact. Whether the United States likes that or not, the United States will eventually need to accept that. Meaning, the United States need to deal with China as an equal partner in this world, rather than try to domineer above China, to issue ultimatum to hold a gun at China's head. China will not buy that story, and China will defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity. And in terms of the global tariff war and the anti-China tariff war that President Trump and his government have launched, I think what China is doing is to stepping up to defend free trade. Now, defending free trade is not only for China's own economic benefits, it is for the economic benefits of all the countries involved. And ironically, it is also for the benefit of the majority of the people in the United States. Because I really don't believe the majority of the people in the United States wants to pay the tariff charged by the government, because the tariffs are not going to be paid by China or by France or Japan, etc. No, the tariffs eventually will be paid by the American importers, which eventually will be allocated to the purchasers in department stores, in shops of all kinds. Eventually, it will be a tax against the American people. The tariffs themselves will not make America great again. It will not create wealth and riches among the people in the United States. Eventually, it will lead to inflation, higher cost, and it will degrade the living standards of the American people. So I think between China and the United States, let's be honest with each other. If the United States is serious about moving back manufacturing jobs to the United States, China is the best country to help. If the United States wants to build up connectivity, building up highways, railways, high-speed railways, new airports, new container ports of all kinds, new transmission grids of all kinds, or even increase its power generation capacities, China is the best country to help. So view China as a resource which can be utilized for the benefit of the American people. And if we can reach that agreement, Victor Gao, myself, will be probably one of the first to volunteer to promote China-US friendship and cooperation for our mutual benefit.
Mm-hmm. On the other hand, I think a lot of Americans, maybe they'd be content with the idea of the American system as it currently is imploding. They don't view it as being in line with the pragmatic tradition of our country, of which China has an even more pragmatic tradition. I think that's why we should be such good friends, and we should work together because we have you guys are even more pragmatic than us. Do you think that, well, I'm not even going to ask you that because I know what you said. It was a viral clip that you had. You said that, Trump might be like the Gorbachev for the United States, that these reforms actually bring about the implosion of the system in a way. Do you think that's a possibility? And what do you think that would mean for America? Could America build into something better if that were to happen?
Well, first of all, I always hesitate to talk directly about what's happening in the United States, especially involving political matters, because I consider that to be completely an internal matter of the United States, and the American people have the say. I, Victor Gao, does not have any direct say about that. I can make comments and observations, of course. I can sometimes express my anxieties for the American people so that they can really pick up their acts together. But allow me to make one point. I think I'm really worried about the possibility of multiple crises building up upon each other, eventually leading to a major financial crisis in the United States in the coming 12 months or 18 months or 24 months, basically before the end of the Trump 2.0 presidency. Why do I say that? There will be huge amount of problems involving the equity market, the bond market. The treasury bond market, for example, is already kind of wobbling, and the US dollar positions and the inflation problem and jobless problem eventually. So I think while the United States is engaged in revolution of one kind after another, and after President Trump's declaration of April the 2nd as the Liberation Day, I still do not know from whom the United States was liberated, from the Spanish or from the British or from the French. I really do not know. But be very careful when you launch revolutions, especially multiple revolutions. So my concern is that if you combine all these things together, eventually by the end of the day, when the dust does settle, you may be hit with a major financial crisis. God forbid. I hope it will never happen. However, if it does happen, let me assure you, there will be no other country which can save the United States except China. China did help save the United States in 2008 from the financial crisis. If you do not believe me, then read former Secretary of Treasury Hank Paulson's biography. He will tell you in great details how many times he called the leaders in China, how much he convinced that China really need to pitch in to help from saving the United States from sinking deeper and deeper into the crisis. Now, the point I want to make is simple. If the United States will be hit again by another crisis, China will be the only country which will have the financial wherewithal and the capabilities and the manufacturing prowess to help saving the United States. That means from now till whenever that disaster happens, and I hope it will never happen, the US government and the decision makers in Washington, including members of the Congress, in the Senate, in the House of Representatives, should really care about incentivizing China to do the right thing if a major crisis hits the United States again, rather than, for example, alienating China, pushing China out of the window, writing off China, dismissing China, for example. Remember what happened between China and the United States in 2008 and how much China did to help save the United States. And always keep one option open for the possibility of another financial crisis hitting the United States. And when you look around, there is only one country which will be able to save the United States. And don't foreclose that possibility by alienating China and pushing China out of the window. China is a megatrend for the United States to recognize as well as to engage with for mutual benefit. And I'm one of the factors involved. I always advocate for peace and stability, goodwill, and camaraderie, for example, between China and the United States. And I do hope my vision of China-US relations eventually, in due course, will be a reality between China and the United States.
I couldn't agree more. Professor Victor Gao, thank you so much for joining me here today. Is there anywhere you would like to shout out for people to follow along? I think Americans should, whether it's just on YouTube videos or something like that. You have a very succinct way of putting the complex relations between our two countries.
Thank you very much. To wrap up, allow me to make one final point. I can tell you from the bottom of my heart that the Chinese people are not enemies of the American people. And we want to get along with the American people in peace, in cooperation, in partnership. And I completely agree with President Trump when he said one sentence, that is, if China and the United States can agree with each other, there will be nothing in this world which we cannot overcome. And we will generate miracles for the Chinese people, for the American people, and for mankind as a whole. That should be a better world, and that should be a better relations between Washington and Beijing. And allow me to commit myself completely to make sure that China and the United States will always follow this inevitability of peace rather than being distracted towards the so-called fallacy, if I may use that word, of destined for war between China and the United States. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.